The first time my daughter stopped asking me for permission, I told myself it was nothing. Looking back now, that was the moment everything began. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. I had just finished unloading groceries into the kitchen when Lily came running down the hallway holding a colorful flyer from school. Her cheeks were pink with excitement. "Mom, can I go to Emma's birthday party on Saturday?" she asked. I smiled and reached for the flyer. Before I could even look at it, Lily stopped. Her expression changed. Then she said something that felt strangely wrong. "Actually, never mind. Grandma already said yes." For a second, I thought I had misheard her. "Grandma said yes?" I repeated. Lily nodded casually. "I asked her this morning." Then she grabbed an apple from the counter and disappeared upstairs. The entire conversation lasted less than 30 seconds. Yet I stood there staring at the staircase long after she was gone. Grandma already said yes. The words stayed with me all afternoon. At first, I tried to be reasonable. Margaret had been staying with us for almost 3 months after selling her house. She helped around the house. She picked Lily up from school when Ethan worked late. She attended soccer games and piano recitals. She loved her granddaughter deeply. None of that bothered me. What bothered me was the feeling that something had shifted without me noticing. That evening, while I prepared dinner, I casually mentioned the conversation to Ethan. He barely looked up from his phone. "Mom probably just wanted to help," he said. "Help?" I asked. "She gave our daughter permission to attend a birthday party." Ethan shrugged. "It is not a big deal." Maybe it was not. Maybe I should have let it go. But the more I thought about it, the more examples started appearing in my mind. Small things. Tiny things. Things I had dismissed at the time. The new bedtime routine Lily suddenly followed. The different breakfast foods appearing every morning. The way Lily now asked her grandmother which clothes matched before school. Individually, none of it seemed important. Together, however, they formed a picture I did not like. Over the next week, I started paying closer attention. What I saw made me increasingly uncomfortable. One afternoon, I told Lily she could have dessert after finishing her homework. She immediately responded, "Grandma says I work better if I take breaks first." Another day, I suggested signing her up for a weekend art class. Lily answered, "Grandma already found a better one." Each comment was innocent. Each comment was polite. Yet every one of them felt like a tiny reminder that someone else's voice carried more weight than mine. The strangest part was that nobody else seemed concerned. Ethan thought I was overreacting. Lily appeared perfectly happy. Margaret acted completely normal. Sometimes I wondered if I was imagining the problem. Then came the Saturday morning that changed everything. Lily had a soccer game across town. I walked into the kitchen expecting the usual chaos of cleats, water bottles, and last-minute searching for shin guards. Instead, I found Margaret and Lily sitting at the table reviewing a handwritten checklist. Not my checklist. Margaret's checklist. Every detail of the morning had already been planned. Departure time, snack schedule, warm-up routine, even what Lily would eat after the game. I stood there silently while they worked through the list together. Neither seemed to notice how strange the scene looked. Later that day, after the game ended, another moment caught my attention. Lily scored her first goal of the season. Naturally, I rushed toward her after the final whistle. So did Margaret. But before I could reach my daughter, Lily ran straight past me and threw her arms around her grandmother. My heart sank. Not because she loved Margaret, because she looked to her first. That night, I sat alone in the family room after everyone went to bed. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. I replayed the past several months in my head. The birthday party, the routines, the schedules, the decisions. One by one, they lined up into something impossible to ignore. Then I remembered something else. Earlier that week, I had overheard a conversation stop abruptly when I entered the room. Margaret and Ethan had been talking about Lily. The moment they saw me, both went silent. At the time, I thought nothing of it. Now, I was not so sure. Because for the first time, I began wondering if everyone else knew something I did not. And if that was true, I was already the last person to find out. The next few days felt different once I started paying attention. Before, I had dismissed most of what Margaret did as harmless grandmother behavior. Now I noticed things everywhere. Small adjustments, small decisions, small moments that seemed insignificant until I looked at them together. On Monday morning, I walked into the kitchen and found Lily eating oatmeal topped with blueberries and sliced almonds. That was unusual because Lily hated oatmeal. I smiled and sat down beside her. "Since when do you like oatmeal?" Lily shrugged. Grandma says it is better for me before school. Margaret looked up from her coffee and smiled. She actually likes it. The comment was harmless. Reasonable even. Yet something about the exchange bothered me. It was not the oatmeal. It was the fact that I had spent years trying to convince Lily to eat healthier breakfasts, while one suggestion from Margaret seemed to carry more influence than dozens from me. Later that afternoon, another moment caught my attention. Lily arrived home from school carrying a permission slip for an overnight science camp scheduled for the spring. Before I could even read it, she walked straight past me and into the living room. "Grandma, do you think I should go?" I stood frozen beside the kitchen counter. Not because Lily asked for advice. Children ask lots of people for advice. Teachers, coaches, relatives. What unsettled me was that she never asked me first. Margaret carefully read the form and spent several minutes discussing the program with Lily. They talked about activities, schedules, and educational opportunities. By the time I joined the conversation, it felt as though a decision had already been made. That evening, I brought the issue up with Ethan again. "Have you noticed how often Lily goes to your mother before she comes to me?" Ethan sighed immediately. "Jessica, not this again. I am serious." He set down his fork and looked at me. "Mom spends a lot of time with her. Of course they are close. That is not what I am talking about." Ethan rubbed his forehead. "Then what are you talking about?" The frustrating part was that I struggled to explain it. The problem was not one specific event. The problem was the pattern. The feeling that my role was slowly being reduced while everyone acted as though nothing had changed. "I feel like decisions are being made without me," I finally said. Ethan's expression softened slightly. "Nobody is replacing you." I wanted to believe him. I truly did. Yet his reassurance did not match what I kept seeing. The following weekend provided another example. Lily and I had planned a mother-daughter shopping trip for nearly 2 weeks. Saturday morning arrived, and I was genuinely excited. Then I came downstairs and discovered Margaret and Lily already preparing to leave. "Where are you going?" I asked. Lily looked surprised. "Grandma is taking me to the museum." I stared at her. "Today?" Margaret immediately stepped forward. "The special exhibit ends tomorrow." I thought it would be a good opportunity. She sounded sincere, thoughtful, helpful, exactly the way she always sounded. Unfortunately, nobody had mentioned it to me. My shopping trip disappeared without discussion, without warning, without anyone considering how I might feel. That night, after everyone went to bed, I sat in the family room staring at old photographs displayed on the bookshelf. Many included Lily and Margaret together. Soccer games, school performances, birthday parties. Looking through them, I noticed something surprising. Their bond had been growing for years. Long before Margaret moved into our house. Long before I noticed anything unusual. The realization should have comforted me. Instead, it raised another question. If this relationship had been developing for so long, why did everything suddenly feel different now? The answer arrived unexpectedly 2 days later. I came home early from work after a meeting was canceled. The house appeared empty. Ethan was still at the office. Lily was at school. Margaret's car sat in the driveway, but I assumed she was in her room. As I walked through the hallway, I noticed a drawer partially open inside the guest bedroom. Normally, I would have ignored it. This time, something caught my eye. Inside the drawer rested a thick spiral notebook filled with handwritten notes. The cover contained only 2 words written neatly in blue ink. Lily Parker. My stomach tightened immediately. Because whatever was inside that notebook, I knew it had something to do with my daughter. And for reasons I could not yet explain, I was suddenly afraid to open it. For several seconds, I simply stared at the notebook. Common sense told me to close the drawer and walk away. It was Margaret's private space, her private belongings. Yet the sight of Lily's name written across the cover made that impossible. Every uncomfortable feeling I had been carrying for weeks suddenly returned. The birthday party permission, the routines, the museum trip, the conversations that seemed to happen without me. Slowly, I picked up the notebook and opened the first page. What I found was not what I expected. There were no legal documents, no custody plans, no shocking revelations. Instead, the pages contained detailed observations about Lily, her favorite books, subjects she enjoyed at school, food she liked, food she avoided, notes about friendships, notes about hobbies, notes about goals. The entries stretched back years. Some dated from when Lily was only 6 years old. I turned another page, then another. The handwriting remained careful and organized throughout. It looked less like a journal and more like a record. A comprehensive record of my daughter's life. My chest tightened. Some entries were completely harmless. Lily was nervous before her piano recital. Lily seemed more confident after soccer practice. Lily enjoyed science projects involving animals. Other entries felt much more personal. Suggestions for handling emotional setbacks. Ideas for encouraging independence. Long-term educational goals. Even thoughts about what type of middle school environment might suit her best. By the time I reached the middle of the notebook, my hands were shaking slightly. None of the content was cruel. None of it was dangerous. Yet every page left me with the same disturbing impression. Margaret had been thinking about Lily's future constantly. Not occasionally. Constantly. Then I found something that stopped me completely. Near the back of the notebook was a section titled Future Plans. The words seemed to leap off the page. Beneath the heading sat multiple pages filled with possibilities for the coming years. High school preparation, college saving strategies, volunteer opportunities, leadership programs, career interests. It was the kind of planning most parents do. Seeing it written by someone else felt strangely unsettling. I closed the notebook immediately. My heart was racing. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe this was simply how Margaret expressed love. Yet the timing felt impossible to ignore. She had moved into our house. She had become increasingly involved in daily decisions. And now I was holding a notebook that looked like a roadmap for my daughter's future. I returned it to the drawer exactly where I found it and closed the bedroom door behind me. The entire evening passed in a blur. During dinner, I watched Margaret carefully. She laughed with Lily, asked about school, helped clear dishes. Nothing about her behavior appeared unusual. Yet every time I looked at her, I pictured the notebook. Later that night, after Lily went to bed, I finally spoke to Ethan. I found something in your mother's room. He immediately looked concerned. What? A notebook? The moment I said the word, his expression changed. Not surprise. Recognition. My stomach dropped. You know about it. Ethan looked away. That was answer enough. How long have you known? I asked. A while. A while. The same vague phrase people always use when they know something they should have mentioned sooner. Why did nobody tell me? Ethan sighed heavily. Because it is not what you think. Then tell me what it is. For several seconds, he remained silent. Finally, he sat down across from me. The seriousness in his face immediately caught my attention. Mom started keeping those notes after something happened years ago. I frowned. What happened? Ethan rubbed his hands together nervously. It was a habit he only displayed when discussing painful topics. It started long before Lily was born. The room felt suddenly quiet. Started with what? I asked. Ethan looked toward the hallway where his mother's room sat behind a closed door. Then he lowered his voice. There is something about Mom's past that you do not know. My pulse quickened. What kind of something? Ethan hesitated. For a moment, he seemed uncertain whether he should continue. Then he took a slow breath. 20 years ago, Mom lost someone she was supposed to protect. The words landed heavily between us. And for the first time since this entire situation began, I realized the notebook might not be about control at all. It might be about fear. I barely slept that night. Ethan's words repeated in my mind long after the house became quiet. 20 years ago, Mom lost someone she was supposed to protect. The sentence changed everything and nothing at the same time. It offered an explanation, but not enough of one. By morning, I had more questions than answers. At breakfast, I studied Margaret carefully while pretending to read emails on my phone. She looked exactly as she always did. Calm, organized, comfortable. She reminded Lily about a school project, asked Ethan about work, refilled coffee cups before anyone noticed they were empty. Nothing about her behavior suggested a person carrying a wound that had shaped 2 decades of her life. After Lily left for school and Ethan headed to the office, Margaret began loading dishes into the dishwasher. Normally, I would have avoided a difficult conversation. This time, curiosity pushed me forward. Ethan told me something last night. I said. Margaret's hands stopped moving immediately. She did not turn around. She simply stood still for several seconds. Then she slowly closed the dishwasher door. What did he tell you? She asked quietly. He said something happened 20 years ago. Margaret lowered her eyes. The reaction alone told me the subject mattered. He said you lost someone. For a moment, I thought she might refuse to answer. Instead, she walked to the kitchen table and sat down. The confidence I normally associated with her seemed to disappear. She suddenly looked older than 72. Not physically, emotionally. I sat across from her. Neither of us spoke right away. Finally, Margaret folded her hands together. "You know Ethan had an older sister?" she asked. My eyes widened. "No." She nodded. "Most people do not." I felt a chill run through me. In all the years I had known Ethan, he had never mentioned having a sister. Margaret stared toward the window. Her name was Caroline. The room became completely silent. Slowly, Margaret began telling a story I had never heard before. Caroline had been several years older than Ethan. Bright, ambitious, kind. According to Margaret, she had a gift for making everyone around her feel important. Family photographs filled entire albums. School awards filled shelves. Every memory seemed wrapped in pride and affection. As Margaret spoke, I noticed the careful way she chose her words. She avoided dramatic details. She focused instead on who Caroline was as a person. The story felt less like a tragedy and more like a mother trying desperately to keep a beloved memory alive. "She left for college when she was 18, Margaret said softly. Everything seemed fine. Her voice grew quieter. Then one day, everything changed. She paused. I waited patiently. Eventually, she continued. Over the following months, Caroline faced personal struggles that few people recognized at the time. The family believed she was doing well because she always sounded cheerful during phone calls. She always reassured everyone that she was fine. Looking back, Margaret realized there were warning signs she missed. Conversations she should have paid more attention to. Questions she should have asked. Support she wishes she had offered sooner. Her eyes filled with tears. "I thought I was giving her independence," she whispered. "Instead, I stopped seeing how much she needed help." My heart broke for her. Suddenly, pieces of the puzzle began falling into place. The notebook, the constant attention, the planning, the schedules, the need to stay involved. None of it sounded like someone trying to steal my role as a parent. It sounded like someone terrified of overlooking another warning sign. "Margaret," I said gently, "what happened was not your fault." She offered a sad smile. Mothers spend a lifetime wondering what they could have done differently. Neither of us spoke for a while. The morning sunlight stretched across the kitchen floor. For the first time, I saw not a controlling mother-in-law, but a woman carrying decades of regret. Yet even as compassion began replacing some of my frustration, one question still remained. Because understanding her fear did not fully explain the notebook. It did not explain why Ethan already knew about it. And it certainly did not explain why conversations about Lily seemed to happen without me. Then Margaret surprised me. She looked directly into my eyes and said something I never expected to hear. "There is one more thing you need to know." My stomach tightened instantly, because the expression on her face told me whatever came next was the part of the story nobody had wanted to discuss. Margaret held my gaze for several seconds before speaking again. The confidence she usually carried seemed completely gone. What remained was vulnerability, the kind that only appears when someone has spent years carrying a burden alone. "After Caroline died," she said quietly, "I made a promise to myself." My chest tightened. She looked down at her hands. "I promised I would never miss the signs again." The words settled heavily between us. Suddenly the notebook made a little more sense. The schedules, the observations, the constant involvement. Yet I still felt there was more she was not saying. Margaret seemed to recognize it too. "That promise became a problem," she admitted. "At first I thought I was simply being attentive. Then years passed, and I realized I had started watching everyone I loved too closely." She laughed softly, though there was no humor in it. "Especially Ethan." That part surprised me. Throughout our marriage, Ethan had always described his mother as supportive. Protective, certainly, but not controlling. Margaret slowly nodded as if reading my thoughts. "You only met me after I learned to hide it better." I sat quietly, allowing her to continue. "For years, every time Ethan struggled with something, I convinced myself I needed to fix it." She looked toward the window. Every challenge felt like another opportunity to prevent history from repeating itself. I began to understand. Not completely, but enough to see the shape of the truth. Fear had quietly become the lens through which she viewed the world. Then Margaret said something that caught me completely off guard. "When Lily was born, it got worse." I froze. She noticed immediately. "Not because of anything she did," Margaret added quickly. "Because I loved her so much." Her voice trembled slightly. "The first time I held her, I remember thinking how fragile life really is." She smiled sadly. "And then I spent years trying to protect her from every possible disappointment." Images from the notebook flashed through my mind. Notes about school, friendships, activities, future plans. Suddenly, they no longer looked like a blueprint for taking over my daughter's life. They looked like evidence of a grandmother desperately trying to prevent loss. "Why didn't you tell me any of this before?" I asked gently. Margaret's expression became complicated. "Because I was ashamed." That answer hurt more than I expected. For months, I had assumed she saw herself as the authority, the decision-maker, the expert. Instead, I was sitting across from a woman who felt embarrassed by her own fears. And because, she continued, I did not realize how much I was crossing boundaries. The honesty stunned me. She was not defending herself. She was not making excuses. She was simply telling the truth. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then another question surfaced, one that had bothered me from the beginning. Why did Ethan know about the notebook? Margaret sighed. Because he found it years ago. I blinked. What? She nodded. He confronted me about it when Lily was 7. The revelation immediately shifted my attention. Ethan knew. Not recently. Years ago. What happened? I asked. Margaret leaned back in her chair. He told me I needed to trust people more. A small smile appeared on her face. It was probably the first time he ever spoke to me like an adult instead of a son. I found myself smiling too. That sounded exactly like Ethan. Then the smile disappeared as another realization arrived. If he knew all this, why didn't he tell me? Margaret looked genuinely uncomfortable. Because I asked him not to. My stomach sank. Suddenly another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The conversations that stopped when I entered the room. The private discussions. The awkward silences. Ethan had been protecting a secret he promised to keep. Not because it involved Lily. Because it involved his mother's pain. Understanding the reason did not completely erase my frustration. But it changed its shape. Before I could respond, the front door opened. A few moments later, Lily's voice echoed through the hallway as she returned home from school. Margaret glanced toward the sound and smiled automatically. The reaction was immediate. Natural. Loving. Then she looked back at me. There is something else you should know, she said quietly. The notebook is not the reason I moved into this house. My pulse quickened again. Because if the notebook was not the reason, then whatever brought Margaret into our home was a secret I still had not uncovered. For the rest of the afternoon, Margaret's final statement lingered in my mind. The notebook was not the reason she moved into our house. If that was true, then everything I had spent weeks worrying about represented only part of the story. After dinner, I found myself watching her differently. Not with suspicion this time. With curiosity. She seemed lighter after our conversation. Not completely at peace, but relieved. As though sharing the truth about Caroline had removed a weight she had been carrying for years. Ethan noticed the change too. When Lily went upstairs to finish homework, he joined me in the kitchen. You talked to Mom? He asked. I nodded. She told me about Caroline. His expression softened immediately. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he sat down across from me. I always wondered if she would ever tell you. Why didn't you? I asked quietly. Ethan looked down. Because it was not my story to tell. I understood that. At least partly. Still, there were questions that remained unanswered. She said the notebook is not why she moved in. Ethan leaned back in his chair. The reaction was subtle, but I noticed it immediately. A slight tension around his eyes. A hesitation before speaking. No, he said. It is not. My pulse quickened. Then why did she move in? Ethan stared at the kitchen counter for several seconds. Finally, he released a slow breath. Because she was scared. I frowned. Scared of what? His answer came so quietly I almost missed it. Being alone. At first, the explanation seemed too simple. Margaret had always appeared independent, strong, capable. Even after selling her house, she carried herself with confidence. Yet the more I thought about it, the more I realized how much of that confidence might have been a mask. Ethan continued speaking. After Dad passed away, she managed pretty well for a while. He paused. At least that is what everyone thought. I listened carefully. Then little things started happening. What kind of things? I asked. Forgetting appointments. Missing calls. Spending entire weekends without talking to anyone. His voice grew softer. Nothing dramatic. Just signs that she was becoming isolated. The image did not match the woman I knew. Yet I remembered something from our earlier conversation. Margaret had described Caroline the same way. Fine. Independent. Doing well. Right until everyone realized she was struggling alone. Suddenly, a connection formed. Not logical perhaps, but emotional. Margaret had spent decades fearing what could happen when people suffer quietly. Then she became the very person she feared. Why didn't she tell anyone? I asked. Ethan laughed sadly. Because she is Margaret Parker. That answer explained more than a detailed explanation ever could. Pride, independence, self-reliance. Those qualities had defined her entire life. Admitting she was lonely would have felt like failure. Over the next few days, I began noticing things I had overlooked before. Small details. One morning, I found Margaret sitting alone on the back porch before sunrise. She was not reading, not drinking coffee, just sitting quietly watching the sky change colors. Another evening, I overheard her talking on the phone with an old friend. After hanging up, she remained in the living room for nearly an hour staring at family photographs. Not sad exactly, just reflective. The more attention I paid, the more I recognized something familiar. She was not trying to control every aspect of Lily's life. She was trying to stay connected to life itself. Lily gave her purpose, structure, joy. The realization did not excuse every boundary she crossed, but it changed the way I interpreted them. Then something happened that forced me to confront the issue directly. One Saturday morning, Lily asked if Grandma could accompany her on a school field trip scheduled for the following month. Before I could answer, Lily added something unexpected. I think Grandma needs it. Margaret looked genuinely surprised. So did I. What do you mean? I asked. Lily shrugged. She always seems happiest when she is with us. Children have a way of saying simple things adults spend years avoiding. The room became very quiet. Margaret blinked rapidly and looked away. For the first time since this entire situation began, I realized Lily had noticed far more than any of us. And as I watched my daughter reach across the table to squeeze her grandmother's hand, I suddenly understood that the conversation Margaret and I needed most was no longer about notebooks, schedules, or parenting decisions. It was about loneliness, and whether she was finally ready to admit just how much of it she had been hiding. The conversation happened 3 nights later. Not because I planned it, not because Margaret scheduled it. It happened because neither of us could keep avoiding it any longer. The house was quiet. Ethan had taken Lily to an evening school event, leaving just the two of us at home. I was sitting at the kitchen table sorting through mail when Margaret walked in carrying 2 mugs of tea. Without asking, she placed one in front of me and sat down across from me. For several moments, neither of us spoke. The silence felt different from the uncomfortable silences we had shared before. This one felt honest. Finally, Margaret looked at me and smiled faintly. I think we have both been avoiding the same conversation. I nodded. Probably. She wrapped both hands around her mug. You want to know why I became so involved with Lily? There was no point pretending otherwise. Yes. Margaret stared into her tea for a long moment before answering. Because I was terrified. The admission sounded strange coming from her. Fear was not an emotion I associated with Margaret. She had always seemed composed, prepared, in control. Yet everything I had learned over the past few weeks suggested that image was incomplete. After Caroline, she continued softly, I spent years believing that if I paid enough attention, I could prevent bad things from happening. Her voice remained calm, but I could hear the sadness beneath it. I watched people closely. I worried constantly. I convinced myself I was helping. I listened quietly. Sometimes I was helping, she admitted. Sometimes I was simply interfering. The honesty caught me off guard. She was not defending her actions. She was evaluating them. When Lily was little, I told myself I was just being an involved grandmother. A sad smile appeared on her face. Then one day I realized I knew her school schedule better than some parents know their own children's schedules. Neither of us laughed. The statement was too true. Margaret sighed. That should have been my warning sign. For the first time, I understood that she had recognized the problem long before I did. She simply did not know how to stop. Why didn't you step back? I asked gently. Margaret looked toward the family room where photographs lined the shelves. Because every time I tried, I felt like I was abandoning someone. The answer broke my heart. Not because it was dramatic, because it felt painfully human. For decades, she had linked involvement with love. Distance felt dangerous. Boundaries felt risky. Then she surprised me again. You know what scared me most after moving here? I shook my head. Not getting older. Not selling my house. Her eyes met mine. Losing my place in the family. The words hit me harder than anything else she had said. Because for months I had been carrying exactly the same fear. Suddenly, I saw the irony. We had both been protecting our place in the family at the same time. I worried about losing my role as Lily's mother. Margaret worried about losing her role as grandmother. Neither of us realized the other was afraid. I thought you were trying to replace me, I admitted quietly. Margaret immediately shook her head. Never. Her response came so quickly that I believed her. I wanted to matter, she said. That is different. We sat silently for several moments. Then she added something I never expected. And I owe you an apology. My eyes widened slightly. Margaret smiled sadly. I crossed boundaries. She took a slow breath. You should have been part of conversations that happened without you. You should have been consulted about decisions. You should never have felt invisible in your own home. Hearing the words lifted a weight I did not realize I was still carrying. Not because they erased everything, but because they acknowledged it. She understood. Finally, she understood. A few minutes later, the front door opened. We heard Lily laughing about something Ethan had said. Their voices drifted through the hallway. Margaret smiled immediately. So did I. The tension that had defined our relationship for months felt strangely absent. Not completely gone, but transformed. Before standing up, Margaret looked at me one last time. There is something I want to do tomorrow, she said. What? Her smile grew warmer. I think it is time Lily heard some of this story too. My heart skipped slightly, because whatever happened next would not just change the relationship between Margaret and me. It would change the way our entire family understood one another. The following evening, the four of us gathered around the dining room table after dinner. Nothing about the scene seemed unusual at first. A half-finished dessert sat in the middle of the table. Ethan was helping Lily solve a puzzle from a magazine. Margaret appeared calm, though I noticed she kept folding and unfolding her napkin. The nervous habit surprised me. For someone who had spent her entire life appearing composed, she suddenly looked uncertain. Eventually, Ethan glanced toward her and smiled encouragingly. You wanted to tell Lily something? Margaret nodded slowly. Lily looked up. Immediately. Am I in trouble? The question made all of us laugh. No, Margaret said gently. Not even a little. Lily relaxed in her chair. Margaret took a slow breath before continuing. I just wanted to share something important about our family. For the next several minutes, she told a version of Caroline's story that was appropriate for a 10-year-old child. She spoke about kindness, about paying attention to people we love, about how sometimes strong people carry struggles nobody else can see. Lily listened carefully the entire time, more carefully than I expected. Children often understand emotional truths better than adults realize. When Margaret finished speaking, the room remained quiet for a moment. Then Lily asked the question none of us anticipated. Is that why you always worry about me? Margaret blinked. The directness of the question clearly caught her off guard. Maybe a little, she admitted. Lily thought about that answer. Then she smiled. I kind of figured. Ethan laughed softly. I stared at my daughter in surprise. You did? Lily nodded. Grandma checks on everyone. She shrugged as though describing the weather. She always has. The simplicity of her observation struck me immediately. For months, I had interpreted Margaret's behavior through the lens of conflict. Lily saw the exact same behavior and interpreted it as caring. Neither perspective was entirely wrong. Yet hearing my daughter describe it so casually changed something inside me. The conversation continued for nearly an hour. For the first time since Margaret moved into our home, everyone spoke honestly. Ethan admitted that he had worried about his mother's loneliness long before she sold her house. Margaret acknowledged that she often stepped into situations where she should have stepped back. I admitted that I had allowed my frustration to grow without expressing it clearly. Nobody argued. Nobody defended themselves. We simply listened. By the end of the evening, something unexpected happened. The problem I had spent months trying to solve suddenly looked completely different. Originally, I believed the central issue was authority. Who made decisions? Who had influence? Who occupied which role? Now I realized those concerns were only symptoms. The real issue had always been fear. Margaret feared losing connection. I feared losing my place as a mother. Ethan feared disappointing people he loved. Even Lily carried fears about disappointing adults who cared about her. Fear had quietly shaped all of our behavior. Once it was spoken aloud, it seemed far less powerful. Over the following weeks, several practical changes occurred. Some were small. Some were significant. Margaret stopped making decisions about Lily without discussing them with me first. Family schedules became shared conversations rather than assumptions. Ethan became far more careful about involving me in discussions that affected our household. Most importantly, I stopped viewing every interaction between Lily and Margaret as competition. One Saturday morning, I watched the two of them baking cookies together in the kitchen. Months earlier, the scene would have irritated me. I would have focused on how much time they spent together. Instead, I found myself smiling. Lily was lucky to have a grandmother who loved her so deeply. The key was making sure that love existed within healthy boundaries. Surprisingly, Margaret seemed relieved by those boundaries as well. Without the pressure of trying to be everything to everyone, she looked more relaxed than I had ever seen her. One afternoon, while helping me fold laundry, she said something that stayed with me. "You know, Jessica, I spent years believing love meant preventing every possible mistake." She folded a towel and smiled. "Now I think love might mean trusting people enough to let them live their own lives." The statement felt like the final piece of a puzzle. Not because it solved every problem, because it showed how much she had changed. That evening, after everyone else went to bed, I passed by the guest room and noticed the notebook resting on Margaret's desk. The same notebook that once filled me with anxiety. This time, however, I felt something completely different. Understanding. And when I looked at it, I no longer saw a grandmother trying to take my place. I saw a woman who had spent years carrying pain she never fully healed from, and who was finally beginning to let go. Spring arrived quietly that year. The snow disappeared. The trees outside our neighborhood slowly turned green again. Life moved forward the way it always does, one ordinary day at a time. Looking back, that was probably the biggest change of all. The drama that once consumed every conversation gradually faded into the background. In its place came something far more valuable. Stability. Not perfect stability. Real stability. The kind families build when they finally stop hiding from difficult conversations. By April, our household felt completely different from the one that existed only a few months earlier. Margaret still lived with us, but the dynamic had changed. She was no longer trying to anticipate every decision before it happened. I was no longer analyzing every interaction she had with Lily. Ethan was no longer trapped between two people he loved. We had finally started functioning as a team. One Saturday morning, I woke up earlier than everyone else and walked into the kitchen. Sunlight poured through the windows. The house was silent. As I prepared coffee, I noticed a familiar notebook sitting on the counter. Margaret must have left it there accidentally. For a moment, I simply looked at it. Months earlier, that notebook had represented everything I feared. Secrets, control, exclusion. Now it represented something entirely different. Healing, growth, understanding. A few minutes later, Margaret entered the kitchen wearing her robe and slippers. She immediately noticed where my eyes had landed. "I keep meaning to put that away," she said with a smile. I surprised both of us with my response. "Maybe you should keep it." She looked confused. "Why?" I shrugged. "Because it tells a story." Margaret laughed softly. "A very long story. An important one." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she picked up the notebook and carefully flipped through several pages. Her expression became thoughtful. "You know," she said quietly, "I have not written in it for weeks." The statement caught me off guard. She noticed my surprise and smiled. "I do not feel like I need it anymore." Those words stayed with me for the rest of the day. Not because of the notebook itself, because of what it represented. For years, Margaret had used those pages to manage fear, to create order, to convince herself she could protect the people she loved if she simply paid enough attention. Now she was learning something new. Trust. A few weeks later, Lily's school hosted an awards ceremony. Families filled the auditorium. Students sat in neat rows near the stage. As we waited for the event to begin, I looked around our section. Ethan sat beside me. Margaret sat beside Lily. The four of us looked like any other family attending a school function. Yet I knew how much work it had taken to reach that moment. Halfway through the ceremony, Lily received recognition for academic achievement and community service. As she walked across the stage, the audience applauded. I glanced toward Margaret. Tears filled her eyes. Not dramatic tears. Quiet ones. The kind that appear when gratitude becomes too large to keep inside. When the ceremony ended, Lily rushed toward us holding her certificate. She hugged Ethan first, then me, then Margaret. No hesitation, no competition, no confusion about who belonged where. Each relationship occupied its own place. Each connection remained important. Watching that simple exchange felt strangely emotional. Months earlier, I worried that love was something people fought over. Now I understood that love expands when people stop treating it like a limited resource. That evening, we celebrated with dinner at Lily's favorite restaurant. During dessert, she raised her glass of lemonade and made an unexpected announcement. "I think I have the best family in the world." Everyone laughed. Ethan teased her about being biased. Margaret rolled her eyes playfully. But I noticed something else. Nobody looked uncomfortable. Nobody looked uncertain. We all believed her. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I stood alone on the back porch watching the stars. The air felt warm, peaceful. I thought about the woman I had been at the beginning of this journey. Defensive, hurt, convinced that someone was trying to take my place. The truth turned out to be far more complicated and far more human. Margaret was never trying to become Lily's mother. She was a grandmother carrying old grief and hidden loneliness. I was never fighting for control. I was fighting for connection. Ethan was never choosing sides. He was trying to protect people he loved while struggling to communicate honestly. In the end, none of us were enemies. We were simply imperfect people carrying different fears into the same family. And once those fears finally had names, they stopped controlling us. The notebook eventually disappeared into a drawer. Life continued. School projects came and went. Holidays arrived and passed. New memories replaced old worries. Yet one lesson remained. The strongest families are not the ones who avoid conflict. They are the ones willing to face it together. And every time I watch Lily laughing with her grandmother across the kitchen table, I am reminded that understanding someone does not erase the past. It transforms the future.